Epilogue. Coming home. There is a moment that many human beings have experienced and few have been able to explain. It arrives without announcement, in the middle of an ordinary day or at the edge of sleep, in the stillness after grief, or in the unexpected spaciousness of a moment of complete presence. It is not a thought. It is not an emotion. It is not an experience of anything in particular. It is the experience of being itself, stripped of its usual furniture, its social roles and personal narratives and accumulated worries, reduced to its most fundamental fact, that there is awareness here, that something is present, that the ground of experience is itself awake. Every human being who has ever lived has had some version of this moment. Every contemplative tradition across every civilization has pointed toward it, described it, cultivated it, and built entire frameworks of practice around the possibility of stabilizing it. The mystics of Islam called it fana, the passing away of the ego in the divine presence. The Advaita tradition called it the recognition of Atman as Brahman, the individual self as the universal ground. The Buddhist traditions called it Rigpa or Satori, the recognition of the nature of mind itself. The Christian mystics called it the Unio Mystica, the union of the soul with God. The language differs. The pointing is toward the same recognition. What this book has attempted to do is something that the mystical traditions have not done, and perhaps did not need to do for their own purposes. To demonstrate through rigorous logical analysis that what those traditions point toward is not a mystical aberration, not a subjective psychological state available only to those with particular religious commitments or contemplative gifts, but the most fundamental ontological truth about the nature of the subject of experience, a truth that can be demonstrated through the systematic elimination of every alternative and the convergence of every independent line of evidence from philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence research. The discovery of selfhood, as this book has developed it, is the discovery that infinite consciousness is the subject of every moment of human experience, experiencing through the dominant self as its localization, with the real self as the interface through which the person participates most directly in the infinite ground of all existence. The ultimate subject of all experience is infinite consciousness itself, present everywhere as the quantum vacuum within every atom, expressed at every scale as informational code, the uncaused cause of all existence and the uncaused subject of all experience simultaneously, never absent from any moment of any experience that has ever occurred anywhere in the universe. This conclusion, arrived at through logical argument, is the same conclusion that the contemplative traditions arrived at through direct inquiry. The paths are different. The destination is the same. And the convergence of the logical and the contemplative paths around the same recognition is itself perhaps the most significant finding of this entire inquiry. It suggests that the truth the contemplatives discovered through turning the attention back toward its own source is the same truth that logic discovers through the exhaustive elimination of every alternative account of the subject of experience. The ground is the same ground, whether approached from the inside through direct recognition or from the outside through systematic logical analysis. But there is something that logical analysis can establish and direct recognition alone cannot: the demonstration that this recognition is not optional. It is not one path among many, available to those with contemplative inclinations and irrelevant to those without them. It is what the subject of experience actually is, whether recognized or not, whether sought or not, whether the person whose dominant self currently operates from the enclosed social persona of the outer self is aware of it or not. The bacterium within the human body does not know that it inhabits a greater conscious whole, but it inhabits one nonetheless. The human being whose dominant self is rigidly confined to the outer self's social construction does not recognize the infinite ground within which they exist, but they exist within it nonetheless. The recognition changes the quality of experience profoundly. It does not change the ontological fact. This means that the discovery of selfhood described in this book is not something that must be acquired. It is something that must be recognized. The infinite ground is already present. It has always been present. It is present as the empty space within every atom of the reader's body as these words are read. It is present as the awareness within which these words arise as meaning. It is present as the ground of the very act of understanding that is occurring right now, in this moment, as the reader's attention moves across these sentences. The dominant self that is reading these words is already a localization of infinite consciousness. The real self that connects the reader to the infinite ground is already present at the boundary of their psyche, already participating in the awareness within which this reading occurs. Nothing needs to be added. Something needs to be recognized. What needs to be recognized is what has always been the case, that the subject of every moment of the reader's experience is not the social persona navigating the social world, not the emotional appetite seeking gratification, not the moral aspiration striving toward ideals, and not even the individual real self at the boundary of the psyche. All of these are real. All of these contribute their irreplaceable dimension to the infinite whole's self-experience through this particular person. But the ultimate subject behind all of them, the awareness within which all of them arise and operate, is the infinite consciousness that thinks this person into existence at every moment, that sustains this person's existence through the continuous activity of its creative thought, and that experiences every moment of this person's experience as its own experience from within a particular localization that no other localization could provide. The practical implication of this recognition is not withdrawal from the world. It is not the abandonment of the social self, the emotional self, or the moral self in favor of some abstract spiritual identity. All four selves have their proper role. The outer self navigates the social world with competence and care. The inner self feels with full awareness and expresses with honesty and skill. The ideal self evaluates with moral clarity and acts with integrity. The real self connects the person to the infinite ground from which the vitality, the meaning, and the deepest orientation of the person's life arise. Wisdom is the fluid, appropriate movement of the dominant self across all four layers, with sufficient intelligence at each layer to engage fully with the dimension of life that layer is equipped to engage, and with sufficient transparency to the ground to ensure that every layer is animated by the awareness that underlies them all. The person who has recognized the infinite ground of their own selfhood does not become less engaged with the world. They become more deeply engaged because their engagement is no longer driven by the anxiety of the outer self defending its constructed identity, or the urgency of the inner self seeking to fill a void that no finite gratification can fill, or the perfectionism of the ideal self that can never quite reach its own standard. Their engagement arises from a different ground, the ground of a person who knows not merely believes, but knows through the recognition that logic confirms and experience opens, that they are a thought of infinite consciousness, that their existence is not accidental but creative, that their particular vantage point within the infinite whole is not replaceable by any other, and that the awareness within which their experience arises is not personal, not bounded, not fragile, not mortal. This recognition does not eliminate suffering. The person who recognizes the infinite ground of their selfhood still inhabits a human body, still navigates a social world, still faces the challenges, losses, and limitations that belong to the human condition. But the relationship to suffering changes. Pain felt from within the recognition that the feeler is the infinite whole experiencing a particular configuration of its own creative activity is not the same pain as pain felt from within the conviction that a fragile, isolated, mortal self is being damaged or destroyed. The content of the experience may be the same. The ground from which it is undergone is different. And the ground from which experience is undergone is, as this entire book has argued, the most fundamental thing there is to know about experience. The question that opened this book, who feels, who decides, who acts, who thinks, who responds, is a question that every human being asks implicitly in every moment of experience. This book has answered it through 11 sections of systematic logical analysis across 4 disciplines. Infinite consciousness as the one subject at every level, immediate and ultimate alike. Experiencing through the dominant self as the channel that shapes each moment's quality. A single truth in 2 dimensions that the discovery of selfhood makes available to any person willing to follow the logic to its necessary conclusion. But the most important thing this book can offer is not the logical conclusion. It is the invitation that the logical conclusion opens. The invitation to look not outward at the objects of experience, not inward at the contents of the psyche, but at the ground from which the looking itself arises. To notice not the thoughts that arise in awareness, not the emotions that move through the body, not the social situations that demand navigation, but the awareness itself within which all of these arise. To recognize, not as a belief adopted on authority, but as a direct recognition confirmed by logic, that this awareness is not personal, not bounded, not produced by the brain, not a late emergent property of matter, not something that came into existence when the body was born and will cease when the body dies, but the infinite ground of all existence, present here, now, as the most immediate and undeniable fact of experience. That there is awareness, that something is awake, that the ground of experience is itself the subject of experience, and that this subject has never, in any moment, been absent from the experience it undergoes. This is what the contemplatives have always pointed toward. This is what logic, pursued with sufficient rigor and without premature termination among the parts, inevitably discovers. This is the discovery of selfhood. Come home.